The first thing I saw was my mother's hand, her fingers tightening around a champagne flute just as the stem snapped clean under the pressure. The glass hit the floor near her heel, scattering under the lantern lights like ice busted apart on a winter highway. And all it took was me stepping across the threshold. I'd come in quietly, boots polished, Class A jacket pressed sharp ribbons catching the amber glow of the chandeliers. The smell of cedar beams and sweet wedding roses hit me like a memory I hadn't asked for. Conversations paused mid-laugh. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The low hum of the band stalled until only the lake wind outside could be heard brushing against the windows. Then Mason Hale saw me. He was on stage, one hand resting on the mic, the other tucked casually in his pocket, like he hadn't once hidden my enlistment letter behind a heater vent or shredded the only uniform I owned at 18. He blinked, jaw tightening the way guilty men do when the past steps into the room wearing rank they once swore you'd never earn. My mother's eyes widened, color draining from her cheeks. My sister Hannah whispered, "Elena, you really came back." And my stepfather Richard Hawthorne set his glass down slow, studying me the way a man studies a threat he doesn't yet understand. I didn't say a word, just squared my shoulders the way the army taught me, chin steady breathing even. My heart knocked once against my ribs, hard enough to feel but not enough to show. Not here, not in front of them. The lights above flickered slightly, settling into a warm gold against the wooden beams. Someone in the back cleared their throat. Someone else shifted in their chair. A full room of people waiting for me to break. I didn't. 12 years is a long time to practice standing still. And if you've ever had to walk back into a place that once broke you, stay with me. You'll understand why I came home. The sound of the broken glass was still settling when Hannah stepped toward me. Her veil brushed against the soft lights above her, catching little sparks of gold as she moved. She didn't come close, just far enough that I could see her hands trembling around the bouquet. 12 years is a long time to misunderstand somebody, but fear always shows up first. I thought you... Her voice cracked, then steadied. They said you dropped out, that you vanished. I didn't answer right away. My throat tightened the way it does before a long march contained. I let out a slow breath, feeling the wool collar of my uniform warm against my neck. Some truths don't need to be spoken in hallways full of strangers. Before Hannah could take another step, Richard was there. His shoes stopped just short of the rose petals scattered across the aisle. His voice stayed low, polite enough for company, but stiff enough to bruise. "We don't know why she's here, Hannah. Keep your distance." He didn't look at me when he said it. That stung more than I expected. A man doesn't need volume to cut you down. Behind him, the band tried to resume a soft instrumental, but the notes wavered like even the music wasn't sure it should continue. The room shifted back to life in small movements, a chair scraping the clink of a fork, murmurs pressed beneath breath. But eyes kept drifting my direction, curiosity stretching thin across the tables. Then Mason made his move. He approached with a smile too bright for a man who once ripped the only future I had. He extended his hand, clean, steady, rehearsed. "Elena Wright." "Long time." I looked at his hand, not taking it. A muscle jumped in my jaw. He knew exactly who I was. The silence between us lasted longer than it should have, long enough that someone nearby coughed to fill the space, and that's when I noticed her. Standing just behind Hannah's shoulder was a woman in a sage-green bridesmaid dress, Aubrey. She wasn't staring the way others were. No wide eyes, no whispering. Just a steady, almost thoughtful gaze. Like she was trying to read something that hadn't been written yet. Her presence wasn't loud, but it was grounding. Not everyone in that room was bracing against me. Some were simply watching, wanting to understand. Mason's hand still hovered in the space between us when I finally lifted my eyes from it. The edges of the room had settled into that strange, half-quiet a wedding gets when something breaks the rhythm. Soft music fading into background static, candles flickering against tall glass vases. Guests pretending not to stare. I didn't give Mason the answer he wanted. Instead, I spoke to the room. "My name is Captain Elena Marlowe," I said, voice steady. "United States Army. Humanitarian Support Brigade." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Truth rarely does. The words drifted across the ballroom like a slow wind, gentle but heavy enough to shift the air. A chair scraped somewhere near the front. Then a man stood. Older silver hair, trimmed neat suit pressed with the kind of precision only decades of service can teach. Colonel Everett, though I didn't know his name yet. He didn't hesitate. Didn't glance around for permission. He just straightened his back, lifted his chin, and gave me a full formal salute. A clean, crisp motion. One soldier acknowledging another. The room fell into full silence. Even the band stopped this time. The violinist lowered her bow without looking away, as if afraid the smallest sound might break whatever moment had just settled between us. I returned the salute, not sharply, not theatrically, just with the quiet respect the gesture deserved. My sleeve brushed lightly against my ribs as I moved, and I felt the familiar weight of the ribbons there. Years of dust sweat and ration bars. Years of earning what so many thought I would never touch. Hannah's breath caught. A soft, thin sound. She stepped a little closer, bouquet trembling again. Under the warm lantern glow, she looked younger than I remembered, small, uncertain, carrying a story someone else had written for her. You didn't fail like they said," she whispered. Her voice wasn't accusing, just lost. I felt something shift in my chest, a small ache, old but recognizable. The kind that comes from being misunderstood long enough that the truth feels almost foreign. "No," I said gently. "I didn't fail." My fingers curled once against the side seam of my trousers, grounding myself in the fabric. I just learned to survive without people who didn't believe in me. Hannah swallowed hard. Richard stiffened beside her. Mason's practiced smile faltered, slipping just enough to expose a flash of something raw, fear maybe, or anger at not controlling the narrative anymore. But Colonel Everett, he held his salute a second longer, eyes steady before lowering his hand with the calm certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was honoring. And for the first time that evening, I felt no need to look away. Colonel Everett's salute settled into the room like dust after a long storm, quiet, inevitable. And once it did, people began to shift again, returning to their seats, lifting their glasses, pretending to ease back into celebration. But the air didn't move the same. It felt heavier, more honest. Like everyone sensed a curtain had been pulled back, even if they didn't yet understand what lay behind it. Mason cleared his throat first. He stepped forward with a practiced chuckle, the kind men use when they're trying to smooth over a truth they didn't expect to meet face to face. The lantern light caught a faint sheen of sweat along his hairline. "Well," he said, palms lifting in a harmless gesture, "Elena always had big dreams. Some folks just try things they're not cut out for. I only tried to show you the army wasn't for you." He said it casually, too casually. A small sentence dropped into the air like a stone into still water. My jaw tightened just once. A small, controlled movement. That's all I allowed myself. But Aubrey heard it. I saw her eyebrows lift just slightly, the look of someone who'd been handed the missing corner of a puzzle she didn't realize she'd been assembling. She stepped closer to Hannah, leaned in, and whispered something. Hannah's eyes widened, not at me, but at Mason. The bouquet in her hand dipped, petals brushing the floor. Aubrey straightened, her voice soft but firm. "Elena, do you remember that video Hannah posted years ago, the one she deleted?" I felt a faint pull in my chest, old instinct warning me something buried was shifting. Hannah's cheeks went pale. "Aubrey, don't." But Aubrey continued, eyes never leaving Mason. "You were 16, Hannah. Crying in your room. You said Mason took Elena's army letter, hid it behind the basement furnace, tore up her enlistment papers because he knew better." The guests closest to us stopped pretending to sip their drinks. "And you said," Aubrey added quietly, "that he told your mother Elena skipped her mental evaluation, so she wouldn't qualify." Hannah pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes shining not with tears, but with dawning recognition. Memory can be cruel when it returns with detail. Mason's face drained of color. That was a kid's rant, she didn't know what she was talking about. But his voice cracked on the last word. Not loudly, just enough for the truth to seep through. That was the moment everything started to split, small fractures running through 12 years of lies, steady as cracks spreading across old ice. And for the first time that night, I wasn't the only one who felt the ground shift beneath us. Hannah's hand slipped from her bouquet first. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow loosening of her fingers until the flowers tilted, then sagged, brushing the wooden floorboards. The petals made a soft sound when they touched down, almost like a sigh. She didn't cry, but her lips parted in the kind of realization that hollows a person out from the inside. 12 years, she whispered more to herself than to me. I believed all of it. Her shoulders shook once. Not a sob, just a tremor, the body catching up to a truth the mind finally stopped running from. Around us, the guests shifted, not loudly. Americans don't like public confrontation, not at weddings, not anywhere. So they moved the way people do when they sense a storm isn't theirs to stand in, quietly, subtly forming a small, accidental ring that left Mason exposed in its center. A few stepped back, others leaned away, just enough to signal discomfort. Mason's jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists at his sides, then opened again like he couldn't decide whether to defend himself or disappear. Colonel Everett had remained standing. He took one step closer to me, the polished tips of his shoes catching the amber light. His voice dropped to a low murmur, steady, almost kind. "I'll forward this to someone at recruiting command," he said. "Justice has its own pace, but it moves." I felt a breath settle somewhere deep in my ribs, not relief, just acknowledgement. The quiet kind that comes from a man who knows the weight of unfinished stories. Richard finally broke the silence, his voice sharp with forced authority. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Kids exaggerate. Mason has been good to this family." But the sentence hung unfinished. No one met his eyes. Not a single guest turned toward him. Even the band members, pretending to organize sheet music, stopped shuffling papers long enough to let the emptiness between his words sink in. My mother sat a few feet away, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for someone to tell her what expression to wear. Her face was pale eyes fixed on a spot on the tablecloth as though the pattern might offer her a way out. She didn't speak. Didn't blink much either. If guilt has a sound, it's silence. And in that silence, the distance between all of us widened slowly, but with purpose, like a curtain being pulled open to finally let the truth breathe. Hannah didn't say a word at first. She just stepped forward, reached for my sleeve, and gave the lightest tug, barely enough to move fabric. But I understood. Some gestures don't need volume. I let her lead me down a side hallway lined with pine planks and fairy lights. The music fading behind us until all I could hear was the soft rustle of her gown brushing against the floor. She pushed open a small door near the back, a bridal dressing room. The scent of hairspray and roses hung thick in the air. A single lamp glowed on the vanity, soft and warm, catching the tremble in her veil as she closed the door behind us. When she finally looked up, her mascara had smudged just a little at the corners. Not messy, just human. "What did you go through all these years?" she asked. Her voice wasn't sharp. It carried the tone of someone bracing for an answer they already feared. I drew in a slow breath, the kind you take when you know the truth won't be pretty, but it's all you have left to give. Well, I started resting one hand on the back of a wooden chair I slept in my car for the first 2 months of basic training. The memory rose up easily, cold Minnesota mornings fogging the windshield, the hum of distant generators, the ache in my spine from the seatbelt buckle pressing between my ribs. I worked nights. I continued mopping hallways at a clinic, stocking shelves at a gas station. Anything to pay off what I owed. My fingers tightened slightly on the chair. Old fatigue has a way of showing up even after years of rest. And I sent letters home. I looked at her then, steady, not accusing, 14 of them, not one came back. Hannah's breath stuttered. She lifted a hand to her mouth but dropped it halfway, letting it fall against her gown as if the weight of it had doubled. "I thought you abandoned us," she whispered. The lamplight flickered across her face, making her look younger, like the girl who used to follow me around the yard with mismatched socks and scraped knees. I stepped closer, close enough to see the small freckle near her left eye. "No," I said softly. "I just learned to live without people who shut the door on me." She closed her eyes, and for a moment the room held nothing but the sound of her trying to steady her breathing. No crying, no dramatic collapse, just the quiet grief of realizing a story she had believed her whole life was never true. Sometimes the heaviest truths are the ones spoken gently. Hannah stayed in that small room a moment longer, letting her breath settle. When she finally opened her eyes, something in her expression had shifted, less confusion, more understanding. A quiet kind of grief. The kind you don't scream about. The kind you simply accept because now you know better. I touched her arm lightly, then stepped back. "You should return to your guests," I said. "It's your day." She nodded, but the movement was slow, almost reluctant. I slipped out first, letting the door ease shut behind me. The hallway outside felt cooler, the faint scent of pine drifting in from a cracked window. Somewhere in the distance, the band tried to ease the evening back to normal, a soft guitar riff, careful and hesitant. I knew then it was time to leave. Not out of anger, not from humiliation, just clarity. Some rooms aren't meant to be stayed in even after the truth comes to light. I walked toward the main door's boots, tapping quietly against the wooden floorboards. Each step felt measured, steady, like marching after a long night. I kept my hands at my sides, fingers brushing the seams of my uniform trousers, an old grounding habit. Behind me, I heard fabric swish fast against the floor. "Elena." Her voice was thin but urgent. I turned, and there was Hannah, veil crooked gown gathered in both hands so she wouldn't trip. She stopped a few feet away, breathing hard, cheeks flushed from running. "I want you here," she said, voice shaking with honesty. "God, I want you here more than anything. But if you need to go, I understand." Her words sat gently between us. No guilt, no demands, just a bridge offered, not forced. I managed a small nod. Enough to show gratitude, enough to show love, but not enough to change the decision already anchored in my chest. "I'll see you again," I told her, and I meant it. When I stepped back into the reception hall, the music had quieted completely. Conversations hushed. Every eye in the room tracked my walk, not with suspicion now, but with something closer to respect, or perhaps curiosity about a story they hadn't known existed. Colonel Everett rose again. No hesitation. He lifted his hand in another crisp salute, his expression steady, honoring not the uniform but the road it took to stand in it. I returned the salute. Slow, intentional. Across the room, Mason stood alone near the bar, shoulders slumped, hands shoved deep into his pockets. No one looked at him. Not a soul. The distance around him wasn't loud. It was cold, quiet, earned. No revenge, no shouting, just the truth finally standing where it belonged. I stepped out into the night, letting the cool Montana air settle around me like a blanket I hadn't worn in years. The sky above Cedar Ridge stretched wide and dark, pinpricked with stars, the kind of quiet sky you only see in places untouched by city noise. My breath fogged as I walked the gravel path toward the parking lot, each crunch under my boots, steady, familiar. Leaving the reception didn't feel like retreat. It felt like release. A week later, I was back at my duty station, an army post tucked between rolling plains and sharp morning winds. Routine came easily, early PT briefing rooms, smelling faintly of burnt coffee, soldiers shouting cadence on the track, the hum of Blackhawks warming up in the distance. Life moved with purpose here. Clean, honest, predictable in the ways that mattered. On my second night back, I opened my inbox and saw her name, Hannah Marlowe. The subject line was simple: "I'm ready to know you." I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, letting the words settle. There was no apology written in bold letters, no long confession. Just a beginning. And beginnings, I've learned, are worth more than perfect endings. My days filled up again, field rotations, supply checks, writing reports under flickering office lights. But something in my chest felt lighter, as if some old knot had finally loosened. A few weeks in, I found myself volunteering more with the younger recruits, kids barely 19, some carrying stories heavier than their rucksacks. I'd sit with them on the bleachers after training boots, muddy sweat cooling on our necks, listening more than I talked. I recognized that look in their eyes, the mix of hunger and hurt. It's the same look I once carried. If I could help them carry even a small piece of their burden, it felt like reclaiming something I lost long ago. And that's the thing about family. Some may never change, but you can, and sometimes that's enough to start breathing easier again. So if this story reminded you of someone you lost, or someone who found their way back, Leave a thought below. And if you'd like to stay with me for more stories,